There is a unique, suffocating agony in watching the people you love most eagerly dismantle your life. In my past life, my frantic rush home to save my pregnant sister-in-law ended with me taking the fall for her miscarriage. I lost my husband, my career, and eventually, my sanity in a cold prison cell, while they spent my inheritance. But fate has a wickedly dark sense of humor. I blinked, and it was October 14th all over again. The phone on my desk was ringing. It was her. But this time, I didn't grab my car keys, I grabbed my coffee. Let them burn. The smell of stale printer ink and cheap vanilla air freshener hit my senses like a physical blow. I gasped, my hands slamming flat against the cold mahogany of my desk. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I was staring at a glowing Dell monitor. An Excel spreadsheet blinked back at me, mocking my panic. I touched my face. My skin was warm. My hair was clean. I wasn't wearing the abrasive, scratchy orange jumpsuit of the state penitentiary. I was wearing my favorite navy silk blouse, the one my husband, Oliver, had ripped in a fit of rage the night he handed me the divorce papers. Trembling, I picked up my iPhone. The date on the lock screen read, October 14th, 2024, 1:14 p.m. I dropped the phone as if it had burned me. I was back. I had actually come back. October 14th. The day my life ended. The day my brother Liam's wife, Adelaide B., to everyone who didn't know the venom behind her sweet smile, fell down the stairs of our shared inherited family home. In my previous life, my phone had rung exactly 1 minute from now. It was B, screaming hysterically that she was bleeding, that she had slipped, that she needed me immediately. Like the devoted, idiot sister I was, I abandoned my desk at Harrison and Hayes Associates. I ran out the door, broke every speed limit, and rear-ended a delivery truck in my sheer panic. I had limped the remaining 4 blocks home with a bleeding forehead, only to burst through the front door and find B crumpled at the bottom of the oak staircase. But she wasn't crying for help. She was pointing a perfectly manicured finger right at me. By the time the paramedics and my brother arrived, B had spun a masterful web. She sobbed into Liam's chest, claiming we had been arguing. She told the police that I had come home early, furious over a petty dispute about the house deed, and shoved her. The miscarriage she suffered that day became my cross to bear. Liam, my own flesh and blood, testified against me. Oliver, my husband, looked at me with absolute disgust and filed for divorce, taking my shares of the business. I was convicted of aggravated assault and reckless endangerment. I died in prison 3 years later, from a severe, untreated infection, entirely alone. Bzzz. Buzz. Buzz. My phone vibrated against the desk, snapping me out of the nightmare. The caller ID flashed. B. A cold, unfamiliar calm washed over me. The frantic, loving sister who would have died for her family was buried in that prison graveyard. The woman sitting in this Herman Miller chair was someone else entirely. I picked up the phone and swiped to answer. Rosie, Rosie, please! B's voice was a flawless symphony of terror and agony. It was honestly Oscar-worthy. I'm bleeding. My stomach. God, the baby. Come home, please. You have to come home. I took a slow sip of my lukewarm coffee. B? I can barely hear you. The reception is terrible. Rosie! The stairs! I fell! Come home now! She shrieked, the desperation perfectly pitched. Listen, B. I'm swamped. Richard just dropped the Peterson merger on my desk, I said, my voice deadpan, completely void of the panic she was waiting to feed on. If it's an emergency, hang up and call 911. I'm not a paramedic. What? Rosie, you? I hung up. I didn't just hang up. I powered the phone down completely and shoved it into the bottom drawer of my desk. I took a deep breath, the oxygen tasting sweeter than it had in years. But I couldn't just sit here. I needed an ironclad alibi, the kind of alibi that even Liam's expensive lawyers couldn't poke a hole through. I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and walked out of my office. The bullpen of Harrison and Hayes was buzzing with mid-afternoon energy. I walked straight toward the glass-walled office of my senior partner, Richard Sterling. Richard was a notoriously strict ex-military man who documented everything down to the minute. He was the perfect shield. I knocked twice and pushed the door open. "Richard? Do you have a second?" He looked up from his reading glasses. "Evans. What is it?" "I'm reviewing the quarterly filings." "I know, and I apologize for interrupting," I said, stepping inside and making sure I was clearly visible to the security camera mounted in the corner of his ceiling. "I wanted to go over the Peterson merger documents with you line by line. I found a discrepancy in their asset valuation on page 42. I think it requires your immediate eyes." I brought my laptop. "I can sit here and work through it with you if you have the time." Richard's eyebrows raised in pleasant surprise. He loved diligence. "Good catch, Rosie. Pull up a chair. Let's dig in." I sat down. It was 1:18 p.m. The trap at the house was set, but the mouse was sitting in a corner office in downtown Seattle, doing corporate math. By 2:00 p.m., Richard and I were deep into the files. My internal clock was ticking. In my past life, the ambulance had been called by a neighbor around 1:45 p.m., after I had supposedly fled the scene. "Excuse me, Richard. I need to use the restroom," I said, standing up. "Go ahead. Be back in 5, he grunted, not looking up. I walked into the women's restroom, locked myself in the handicap stall, and pulled out my backup work phone, a cheap Android I used strictly for testing our firm's app interfaces. I connected to the secure office Wi-Fi and opened a specific application. The Wise app. 3 months ago, long before the whispers of my supposed jealousy over Bee's pregnancy began, I had adopted a golden retriever puppy named Buster. Because I worked long hours, I had discreetly installed a small nanny cam on the bookshelf in the main hallway, pointing directly at the front door and the bottom of the grand oak staircase. Liam and Bee didn't know about it. They rarely paid attention to Buster or my side of the house anyway. My hand shook slightly as the loading circle spun. "Please work. Please let the Wi-Fi be strong enough." The screen flickered. And then, the feed went live in crisp 1080p high definition. My breath hitched. There she was. Adelaide Gallagher. She wasn't lying in a pool of agony at the bottom of the stairs. She was standing in the middle of the hallway, pacing furiously. She was wearing a loose maternity dress, holding her cell phone to her ear. She looked perfectly healthy, infuriatingly flawless. I tapped the screen to unmute the audio feed. The microphone on the camera was surprisingly sensitive. "I don't know where the hell she is. Wyatt." Bee hissed into the phone, her voice laced with venom, a stark contrast to the whimpering victim she played for my brother. "She hung up on me. The stupid bitch told me to call 911. Wyatt." My heart skipped a beat. Wyatt Whitwell was Liam's best friend and business partner. The realization hit me like a freight train. The baby wasn't just fake, or if it was real, it certainly wasn't Liam's. "No, I can't just call 911 yet." Bee paced back and forth, her heels clicking on the hardwood. "The whole point is for her to be here. She has to be the one who caused it. Liam is already primed. I've been feeding him stories about Rosie acting aggressively for weeks. If she isn't here, it just looks like an accident and I don't get the house." She paused, listening to Wyatt. Fine. I'll do it anyway. I'll say she sneaked in, pushed me, and ran away. But she needs to not have an alibi. I'll make it work." Bee ended the call and tossed her phone onto the hall table. Then, she did something so diabolical it chilled me to the bone. She reached into her oversized designer handbag and pulled out a small plastic squeeze bottle. It looked exactly like the kind used for special effects makeup. She unscrewed the cap and methodically squirted the thick, dark red liquid all over the skirt of her dress, letting it pool down her legs and stain the expensive Persian rug beneath her. She tossed the empty bottle back into her bag. Then, she carefully lay down at the bottom of the stairs, arranging her limbs into a picture of broken tragedy. She ruffled her hair, smeared a little of the red liquid on her forehead, and took a deep breath. Then she began to scream, "Help! Help me! Somebody please!" The shrill, piercing shrieks echoed through the microphone, making me wince. She kept it up for a full 3 minutes. Finally, the camera caught the silhouette of Mrs. Gable, our elderly neighbor, peering through the frosted glass of the front door. The door was unlocked. B had made sure of that. Mrs. Gable pushed it open, gasped in horror, and immediately fumbled for her phone. I stopped watching. I didn't need to see the rest. My fingers flew across the screen. I downloaded the entire video file, covering the last 45 minutes. I emailed it to my secure Proton Mail account, uploaded it to a hidden Google Drive, and saved a hard copy locally to the Android. I looked at my reflection in the restroom mirror. The woman staring back at me wasn't the broken, weeping victim who had begged her brother for forgiveness for a crime she didn't commit. She was a woman armed with a nuke. I splashed cold water on my face, dried off, and walked back to Richard's office. "Everything all right, Evans?" Richard asked, noticing my slightly flushed face. "Never better, Richard." I smiled, pulling my chair back up to the desk. "Let's finish destroying this valuation." It was 4:30 p.m. when I finally turned my personal phone back on. Within seconds, the device practically vibrated out of my hand. I had 27 missed calls. 15 from Liam, 10 from Oliver, 2 from my mother-in-law. There was a flurry of text messages, each more unhinged than the last. Liam. 2:10 p.m. Where the F*** are you? B is in the ambulance. Liam. 2:45 p.m. Pick up the damn phone, Rosie. She lost the baby. Oliver. 3:15 p.m. Get to Street Jude's right now. Liam is losing his mind. What did you do? What did you do? Even my own husband's first instinct was to assume I was the villain. It stung. A phantom pain from a life I had already lived. But it only hardened my resolve. I calmly packed up my briefcase. I said my goodbyes to Richard and Sarah Jenkins at the front desk, making sure to mention exactly what time it was as I badged out of the glass double doors. I drove to St. Jude's Memorial Hospital. I didn't speed. I didn't run any red lights. I parked meticulously in the visitor's garage, grabbed a stale coffee from the lobby vending machine, and took the elevator up to the maternity ward. The moment the elevator doors slid open on the 4th floor, I saw them. It was a wretched tableau of grief. Liam was slumped in a plastic chair, his head in his hands. Oliver was pacing the corridor, looking deeply annoyed rather than sympathetic. My mother-in-law, Mrs. Gallagher, was clutching a rosary, whispering dramatically to anyone who would listen. Oliver saw me first. His eyes darkened, and he stormed toward me. "Where the hell have you been?" he hissed, grabbing my upper arm tightly. In my past life, I would have flinched, apologized, cried. Today, I looked down at his hand, then up at his face with an expression of absolute freezing detachment. "Let go of me, Oliver," I said softly, but with enough steel that he instinctively dropped his hand, blinking in surprise. Liam's head snapped up. His eyes were bloodshot, his face twisted in a mask of pure hatred. He lunged across the waiting room. "You!" Liam roared, spittle flying from his lips. He shoved me hard by the shoulders, causing my coffee to spill slightly onto my sleeve. "You did this! You killed my kid!" Nurses at the nearby station turned their heads. A security guard started walking over. "Liam, step back," I said, keeping my voice incredibly even. The contrast between his hysteria and my calm was jarring. "I have absolutely no idea what you are talking about. Don't play dumb with me," he screamed, jabbing a finger into my chest. "B told me everything. She said you came home, you started a fight about the house, and you pushed her down the stairs. She's in there right now. Crying her eyes out because of you. Mrs. Gallagher waddled over, her face a mask of pious fury. You wicked, jealous girl. We always knew you resented her happiness. You couldn't give Oliver a child. So you destroyed your brothers. The accusation would have shattered me yesterday. Today, it was just background noise. Liam, I said, speaking slowly and loudly enough for the nurses to hear. I haven't been to the house since I left for work at 7:30 this morning. Liam sneered. Liar. B called you at 1:15. She said you came bursting through the door at 1:30. She did call me at 1:15. I agreed smoothly. She sounded upset, but she was rambling. I told her I was busy with the Peterson merger and told her to call 911. Then, I turned my phone off and went into a 3-hour closed-door meeting with Richard Sterling, my senior partner. Liam froze. The momentum of his rage hit a brick wall. What? I was in Richard's office from 1:18 p.m. until roughly 4:15 p.m., I continued, dusting off my sleeve. The entire floor saw me. I have time-stamped security footage of me badging in and out of the executive suite. And Richard and I signed off on 50 pages of documents together. I physically could not have been at the house. Oliver stepped forward, frowning deeply. Rosie? Is that true? You didn't go home? Why would I go home, Oliver? I asked, looking my husband dead in the eye. I have a career. I don't drop everything because B throws a tantrum. If she fell, it's a tragedy, but I wasn't there. She said you pushed her, Liam yelled. But his voice lacked the absolute certainty it held a minute ago. Panic was starting to bleed into his eyes. Why would she lie about that? I don't know, Liam, I said, taking a step toward him. Why would your wife lie about being violently assaulted by someone who was miles away in a room full of witnesses? Maybe we should ask her. Without waiting for an answer, I bypassed them and walked straight toward B's hospital room. Liam and Oliver scrambled after me. I pushed the heavy door open. B was sitting up in the hospital bed, looking remarkably fresh for a woman who had supposedly just lost a child. She had a tissue dabbed delicately at her dry eyes. When she saw me, she let out a loud, theatrical gasp and shrank back against the pillows. Get her out of here! B wailed, pointing a trembling finger at me. Liam, don't let her near me. She's a monster. Liam walked into the room, but he didn't immediately rush to hold her. He stood at the foot of the bed, looking back and forth between us. Bae, I smiled. It was a terrifying, predator's smile. I heard you had an accident. I'm so sorry I couldn't be there to catch you. But you see, I was at the office all day. B's face faltered. The perfectly crafted mask of the victim slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing the calculating panic underneath. No, you weren't, she stammered, looking at Liam for support. You came home. You yelled at me. You pushed me. I crossed my arms. Really? At what time, exactly? Around 1:30. B doubled down, tears spilling down her cheeks. Liam, make her leave. I pulled out my work phone, the Android, and held it up. That's fascinating, B. Because at 1:30, I was having coffee with Richard Sterling. But what's even more fascinating is what I saw when I checked the Wise camera I set up in the hallway to watch my dog. The color completely drained from B's face. She looked like a ghost. Camera? Liam whispered. Oh, did I forget to mention? I said, my voice dripping with honey. I installed a nanny cam last month. It records video and audio, directly pointed at the stairs. The silence in the room was deafening. The only sound was the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor, which was suddenly picking up a very erratic, terrified pace. The game had just begun, and I was holding all the cards. The rhythmic electronic pulse of the hospital heart monitor was the only sound in the room, and its tempo was rapidly betraying Adelaide's rising panic. She stared at the sleek black rectangle in my hand, as if it were a live grenade. Camera? Liam repeated, the words stumbling out of his mouth like he had forgotten how to speak English. He looked from me to the phone, and then slowly turned his head toward his wife. B. What is she talking about? She's bluffing! B shrieked, her voice cracking as she clawed at the crisp white hospital sheets. Liam, she's a psychopath. She hates me. She's making things up to cover her tracks because she knows she killed our baby. Oliver stepped forward, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. Rosie, if you have proof, show it. Now. I didn't look at my soon-to-be ex-husband. I kept my eyes locked entirely on the pale, sweating face of the woman who had ruined my previous life. With pleasure, I said softly. I tapped the screen, unpausing the video file I had saved securely to the device. I turned the volume up to maximum and held the phone out so Liam could see the crisp, 1080p footage. The tinny, perfectly clear audio of B's voice filled the sterile hospital room. I don't know where the hell she is, Wyatt. Liam flinched. The blood drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. Wyatt? He whispered. Why were you on the phone with Wyatt? On the screen, the digital version of B paced furiously in our hallway, her maternity dress swishing around her perfectly healthy legs. The stupid bitch told me to call 911. The video. B hissed. No, I can't just call 911 yet. The whole point is for her to be here. She has to be the one who caused it. Liam is already primed. Turn it off. B lunged forward, ignoring the IV line pulling taut against the back of her hand. Liam! It's a deepfake! It's AI! She faked it! I easily stepped out of her reach. Watch the screen, Liam, I commanded, my voice echoing with an icy authority I didn't know I possessed until today. Liam was paralyzed, his eyes glued to the small screen as his entire reality fractured. He watched as his grieving, traumatized wife ended her call. He watched, breath catching in his throat, as she calmly reached into her oversized Prada handbag, the one he had bought her for her birthday, and pulled out a plastic squeeze bottle. The room watched in horrified, suffocating silence as B squirted dark red theatrical blood down her legs and onto the Persian rug. Help! Help me! Somebody please! The recorded video screamed, right before I hit pause. A heavy, suffocating silence descended upon the room. It was so profound that I could hear the faint squeak of a nurse's rubber-soled shoes out in the hallway. Oliver looked like he had been struck by lightning. He took a slow, stumbling step backward, his eyes darting between me and B. Mrs. Gallagher, who had been clutching her rosary so tightly her knuckles were white, dropped the beads onto the linoleum floor with a sharp clatter. Liam, B whimpered. Her theatrical bravado entirely evaporated. She looked small, terrified, and utterly exposed. Liam, please. It's not what it looks like. I was scared. I just wanted us to have the house to ourselves. She's always intruding on us. You faked a miscarriage, Liam said. His voice wasn't a yell. It was a hollow, dead rasp. It was the sound of a man whose soul had just been hollowed out with a rusty spoon. You faked losing our child. You poured fake blood on yourself. I was desperate. B sobbed, genuine tears finally falling. She wouldn't leave. You wouldn't make her sell her half of the estate. I just wanted a home for our family. And what about Wyatt? Liam's head snapped up, his eyes suddenly burning with a terrifying, quiet rage. Why were you calling Wyatt, B? My business partner. My best friend. Why were you telling him the plan? B opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked like a fish suffocating on dry land. Because, Liam, I interjected smoothly, deciding to twist the knife. A woman doesn't usually call her husband's best friend to coordinate a fake miscarriage unless that best friend is heavily invested in the outcome. Tell me, B, were you ever even pregnant? Or was that just phase 1 of the scam to guilt Liam into signing the house over? Shut up! B screamed at me, her face contorting into an ugly, hateful sneer. You ruined everything! You smug, arrogant bitch! Rosie, Oliver said, his voice trembling. He reached out to touch my arm. Rosie? My God. I'm so sorry. I thought. I looked down at his hand, then up into his pleading eyes. The eyes of the man who, in another lifetime, had left me to rot in a prison cell without a second glance. The man who had taken my business shares, changed the locks, and started dating his paralegal before my trial was even over. I violently yanked my arm away. Don't touch me, Oliver. I spat, my voice laced with pure venom. Don't you ever lay a hand on me again. Rosie, please, I was worried. Look at the circumstances. The circumstances were that you immediately assumed your wife was a violent, child-killing monster. I interrupted, my tone slicing through his excuses like a scalpel. You didn't ask for my side. You didn't give me the benefit of the doubt. You stood in that waiting room and looked at me like I was garbage. You chose them. And now, you have to live with that. I turned my attention back to the weeping mess on the hospital bed, and the broken man standing at the foot of it. I am going back to the office, I announced, adjusting the strap of my bag. I will be sending a copy of this video to the Seattle Police Department to clear my name of any potential assault charges B might have tried to file. I suggest you figure out your living situation, Liam, because when I get back to the house tonight, I am packing my things. And tomorrow morning, my lawyers will be initiating a forced partition sale of the property. You have 30 days to get her out. I turned on my heel and walked out of the room. I didn't look back when Liam finally shattered, his agonizing, enraged scream echoing down the corridor. I didn't go back to the office. I didn't go back to the house either. Instead, I checked myself into the Fairmont Olympic Hotel under my maiden name. I ordered a dry martini and a medium-rare steak from room service, took a scorching hot shower, and wrapped myself in a plush white robe. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, I slept through the night without a single nightmare. The next morning, I woke up to a phone that was, predictably, a war zone. There were 84 unread text messages and 30 voicemails. Oliver had tried to call me 20 times, leaving desperate, groveling messages begging me to come home so we could talk this through. He was terrified. He realized he had backed the wrong horse. And knowing Oliver, he was doing the mental math on how this would affect his social standing and our shared assets. Liam had left only one voicemail. It was time-stamped at 3:14 a.m. Rosie. It's Liam. His voice was completely wrecked, slurring slightly as if he had been drinking. She's gone. B packed a bag and left the hospital against medical advice. I went to Wyatt's condo. It's empty. His car is gone. Rosie, please call me. I don't know what to do. I'm so sorry. Please. I deleted the voicemail. I didn't feel a shred of pity. My empathy had been surgically removed the day they locked me in a cage. Liam had been perfectly willing to watch me burn to keep his illusion of a happy family alive. Let him choke on the ashes. I opened my laptop and pulled up the financial documents for Harrison and Hayes, but I didn't look at my firm's numbers. I used my high-level clearance to access a private investigative database our firm retained for corporate espionage cases. I typed in Apex Logistics Liam and Wyatt's mid-sized freight forwarding startup. In my previous life, Apex Logistics had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy about 8 months after I went to prison. Liam had claimed the legal fees and the stress of the tragedy had ruined the business. But sitting in my luxury hotel room, armed with the knowledge of Wyatt's betrayal, I started digging into the public filings, UCC liens, and vendor complaints. It took me less than 2 hours to find the rot. Wyatt Whitwell wasn't just sleeping with my brother's wife. He was financially bleeding my brother dry. Over the past 14 months, there had been massive, inexplicable capital transfers from Apex's main operating accounts to a series of shell LLCs registered in Delaware. All of those LLCs had a registered agent connected to Wyatt's personal wealth manager. Wyatt had been embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars. The fake baby. The fake fall. Getting me kicked out of the house, it was all a distraction. It was a brilliantly vile smokescreen. B gets the multi-million-dollar inherited house. Wyatt drains the company. And they both ride off into the sunset while Liam and I destroy each other in a courtroom. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp expression. I took screenshots, downloaded the ledgers, and compiled a neat, devastating PDF dossier. Then, I forwarded the entire package to Madeline Frost. Madeline was a shark in a tailored Chanel suit. She was the most feared divorce attorney in King County, renowned for leaving cheating spouses and manipulative partners with nothing but the clothes on their backs. At 10:00 a.m., my phone rang. It was Madeline. "Rosie," she purred, her voice dripping with lethal professionalism. "I received your email. I must say, waking up to a case involving a faked miscarriage, a hidden nanny cam, corporate embezzlement, and a spineless husband is the best start to a Tuesday I've had in years. I aim to please, Madeline," I replied, sipping my coffee. "I have the divorce petition drafted for Oliver. Given his hostile reaction at the hospital, and your clear evidence of his abandonment, we are going for an at-fault dissolution. I'm freezing the joint accounts as we speak. As for the inherited property with your brother, force the sale," I said without hesitation. "I want my half of the equity in cash. Liam can't afford to buy me out, especially not now. He's broke. He just doesn't know it yet." "What about this dossier on Wyatt Whitwell and Apex Logistics?" she asked, the sound of keyboard clicking echoing in the background. "This is criminal fraud. Hold on to it," I instructed. "I'm not going to the police with it. Not yet. I want to hand-deliver it to Liam. I want to look him in the eyes when he realizes he lost his sister, his wife, his best friend, and his entire life's work in a span of 48 hours. You're ruthless, Rosie. I like it. I learned from the best," I whispered, hanging up the phone. 4 days later, I finally returned to the family home in Queen Anne. I didn't go alone. I arrived in a black SUV, flanked by 2 private security contractors I had hired, and an empty moving truck trailing behind us. The crisp autumn air smelled like cedar and victory. The house was dead quiet when I unlocked the heavy mahogany front door. The stain from B's fake theatrical blood was still seared into the expensive Persian rug in the hallway. No one had bothered to clean it up. It looked exactly like a crime scene. "Start with the master suite on the 2nd floor," I told the movers, gesturing up the stairs. "Pack everything that belongs to me. Leave his." I walked into the formal dining room and stopped dead in my tracks. Sitting at the long oak table, looking like ghosts haunting their own lives, were Oliver, Liam, and my mother-in-law, Mrs. Gallagher. There were half-empty bottles of scotch and crumpled tissues scattered across the polished wood. The air smelled of stale alcohol and desperation. When I walked in, all 3 heads snapped toward me. Oliver stood up so fast his chair tipped backward and crashed onto the floor. He looked awful. He hadn't shaved. His designer shirt was wrinkled, and there were deep purple bags under his eyes. "Rosie," he breathed, taking a hesitant step forward. "You came back." "I came to collect my things, Oliver," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the large room. I didn't move an inch toward him. Mrs. Gallagher puffed up, her ingrained sense of entitlement temporarily overriding her shock. "Now see here, Rosie, you disappear for 4 days without a word? Do you have any idea the stress you've put this family through? Liam is in pieces. The very least you can do is sit down and act like a mature—" "Quiet, Margaret," I snapped, the sheer force of my tone silencing the older woman instantly. She gasped, clutching her pearls in genuine shock. "You lost the right to scold me the moment you accused me of murdering a child in front of a dozen nurses. Do not speak to me again." I turned my gaze to Liam. He hadn't moved. He was staring down at his glass of scotch, his hands trembling violently. "Liam," I said. He slowly looked up. His eyes were hollow, defeated. "She's gone, Rosie. B left the state. Her phone is disconnected. Wyatt is gone too. They cleared out his apartment. I know, I said, pulling a thick manila envelope from my leather tote bag and tossing it onto the dining room table. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud right in front of him. I also know why. Liam frowned, reaching out with shaking fingers to open the envelope. What is this? Oliver asked, moving closer to the table. That, I said, crossing my arms, is a detailed forensic accounting report of Apex Logistics. It outlines exactly how your best friend, Wyatt Whitwell, has been funneling over $600,000 out of your company over the last year. He didn't just steal your wife, Liam. He stole your company. You are insolvent. Liam stared at the papers. He flipped through the pages, his breathing growing shallow and erratic as his eyes darted over the highlighted ledger transfers. The reality of his absolute ruin was washing over him in real time. No. Liam choked out, tears spilling onto the financial documents. No. This can't be real. The loans. My personal guarantee on the warehouse. You're bankrupt, I said, delivering the death blow with zero inflection. And because you used this house as collateral for your last business loan without telling me, the bank is going to try and take it, but my lawyers have already filed an injunction. The house goes on the market next week. The proceeds will be split. But since you owe the bank, they'll take your half. You are leaving here with absolutely nothing. Liam buried his face in his hands, letting out a gut-wrenching sob that echoed off the high ceilings. It was the sound of a man who had dug his own grave and was finally falling in. Oliver stared at me, his jaw slack. Rosie. My God, what are you doing? He's your brother. He needs help. We need to help him. I turned slowly to face my husband. We? There is no we, Oliver. I reached back into my tote bag and pulled out a sleek, blue legal folder. I walked over and slapped it against Oliver's chest. He reflexively grabbed it. What's this? He stammered. Those are divorce papers, I said, savoring the absolute terror that bloomed in his eyes, drafted by Madeline Frost. Since you abandoned me at the hospital and publicly aligned yourself with false allegations of felony assault, the judge is going to be very, very generous to me regarding the division of our assets. Rosie, no! Oliver dropped the folder on the table and reached for my hands. I stepped back, my eyes flashing with a dangerous warning. Please! I made a mistake! I panicked. I love you. You know I love you. I'm your husband. My husband died the moment he looked at me and asked, What did you do? I replied, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. You didn't protect me. You didn't believe me. You threw me to the wolves the second it was convenient. Please, Oliver begged, tears finally pooling in his eyes. I'll do anything. Counseling. Anything you want. I want you out of my life, I said smoothly. My security team is upstairs packing my clothes. I'll be out of here in an hour. Have your lawyer contact Madeline. If you try to call my personal phone, I will file a restraining order. I didn't wait for his response. I turned my back on the wreckage of my old life, walked out into the hallway, and stepped over the dried, fake blood on the rug. I was Rosie Evans. I had survived the fire, and I was leaving them to burn. The view from my new penthouse at the Emerald, overlooking the shimmering expanse of Elliott Bay, was a far cry from the cinder-block walls and barred windows of my previous life. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass, a mug of Earl Grey tea warming my hands, watching the Seattle ferries carve white wakes into the dark water. It had been 3 weeks since the confrontation in the Queen Anne dining room. The silence that followed was not the silence of peace. It was the tense, suffocating quiet of a battlefield after the first major bombardment. Liam was officially homeless. The bank had moved with terrifying speed, seizing the family estate after discovering the fraudulent collateral documents Liam had signed under Wyatt's advisement. I had forced the partition sale, legally extracting my 50% equity in cold hard cash before the creditors could sink their claws into the entire asset pool. Liam was left with the remaining debt. Last I heard through the grapevine of our mutual acquaintances, He was living out of a rented Ford Focus in a long-term motel parking lot near SeaTac Airport, desperately trying to liquidate his watch collection to afford ramen and legal fees. Oliver, meanwhile, had gone nuclear. His ego, bruised by my immediate filing for divorce and his public humiliation at the hospital, had driven him to hire the most aggressive, sleazy litigation firm in the city. Gallagher and Finch. He was demanding spousal support and half of my partnership shares at Harrison and Hayes, claiming my erratic behavior had caused him severe emotional distress. But I wasn't focused on Oliver or Liam right now. They were contained fires slowly burning themselves out. My crosshairs were locked onto the two rats who had fled the sinking ship. Adelaide and Wyatt. They had vanished the night of the hospital incident. Wyatt had liquidated whatever he could from his personal accounts, abandoned his leased luxury condo in Bellevue, and disappeared. B had packed a single Louis Vuitton duffel bag and vanished with him. But people don't just disappear. Not in the digital age, and certainly not when they are running on stolen money. The doorbell chime of my penthouse echoed softly. I set my mug down and opened the door. Standing in the hallway was Sullivan Pierce. Sullivan was a former FBI forensic accountant who now ran a private intelligence firm out of a nondescript office in Pioneer Square. He was a man who spoke in decimals and IP addresses, and I had retained his services the morning after I left Liam's house. "Good morning, Rosie," Sullivan said, his gravelly voice devoid of any pleasantries. He walked in, dropping a thick, leather-bound dossier onto my marble kitchen island. "Tell me you found them, Sullivan," I said, leaning against the counter. "Finding them wasn't the hard part," Sullivan replied, sliding onto a bar stool and opening the folder. "The hard part was untangling the absolute mess Wyatt Whitwell made of his finances. Your brother didn't just partner with an embezzler, Rosie. He partnered with a degenerate." Sullivan flipped to a page filled with bank statements, highlighted in neon pink. "Wyatt didn't steal $600,000 from Apex Logistics to start a new life with your sister-in-law," Sullivan explained, tapping the paper. "He stole it because he was in debt to some extremely unforgiving people. I tracked the wire transfers. They didn't go to an offshore account in the Caymans. They went to a series of shell companies owned by Blackwood Capital." I frowned. Blackwood Capital wasn't a standard private equity firm. They were notorious in the Seattle financial sector for operating in the gray areas of the law: high interest, short-term shadow loans for people who couldn't pass a basic credit check. "Wyatt had a gambling problem," Sullivan continued, pulling out a grainy surveillance photo. "High-stakes baccarat, mostly at the Bellagio in Vegas. But he also frequented underground games in Vancouver. He owed Blackwood $500,000. The money he bled from Liam's company was just keeping his kneecaps intact." A cold, dark amusement washed over me. "So? He didn't run away with a fortune. He ran away broke." "Exactly," Sullivan smirked. "When he liquidated his personal accounts before fleeing, he only managed to scrape together about $40,000. And here is the poetic justice. He took Adelaide with him." I let out a genuine sharp laugh. Bay. Vain, materialistic, status-obsessed Bay, who thought she was running away with a multimillionaire, was actually stuck on the run with a degenerate gambler who had barely enough cash to buy a used Honda. "Where are they?" I asked, my eyes locking onto Sullivan's. "Reno, Nevada." Sullivan slid a final photograph across the island. It showed a dilapidated, neon-lit motel called the Starlight Inn. In the parking lot, standing near a rusted ice machine, was Wyatt. He looked haggard, unshaven, and exhausted. "They've been holed up there for 5 days. Wyatt has been hitting the local casinos, trying to double their remaining cash at the blackjack tables. He's losing. And B? She hasn't left the motel room in 3 days. According to the desk clerk I bribed, they scream at each other all night." I picked up the photo, staring at Wyatt's pathetic form. In my past life, this man had stood by Liam's side at my trial, shaking his head in mock sorrow, as the judge sentenced me to prison. He had worn a tailored Tom Ford suit bought with my brother's stolen money. "Sullivan," I said softly, tracing the edge of the photograph. "Blackwood Capital. They don't strike me as the kind of organization that simply writes off a bad debt." "They aren't," Sullivan agreed. "They have collection specialists looking for him as we speak. Do me a favor," I smiled, a predator baring its teeth. "Anonymously forward this address to Blackwood's main office. Let them know exactly where their investment is sleeping." Sullivan's eyebrows raised a fraction of an inch, a silent acknowledgement of the sheer ruthlessness of the request. He closed the dossier. "Consider it done. I'll send the invoice to your firm." As Sullivan left the penthouse, I picked up my phone. The board was set. The final pieces were moving into place. It was time to deal with my husband. King County Superior Court was a monolithic structure of gray stone and polished granite, a place where lives were dissected and distributed in 15-minute increments. I sat at the heavy mahogany plaintiff's table in Department 42, wearing a sharp, tailored charcoal suit. Beside me sat Madeline Frost, looking like a heavily armed Valkyrie reviewing her battle plans. Across the aisle sat Oliver. He looked furious, but underneath the bravado, I could see the cracks. His tie was slightly crooked, and his leg bounced nervously under the table. Beside him was his lawyer, Simon Brooks, a man known for talking loudly and bullying opposing counsel into settlements. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Honorable Patricia Reyes, banged her gavel. "All right. Let's get this over with. In the matter of the marriage of Evans and Evans, I have reviewed the preliminary filings. Mr. Brooks, your client is requesting a 50-50 split of all marital assets, including Miss Evans' partnership shares at Harrison and Hayes, as well as spousal support. Given that this is a marriage of less than 4 years, that is a rather bold request." Simon Brooks stood up, puffing out his chest. "Your Honor, it is entirely justified. My client sacrificed his own career advancement at his tech firm to support his wife's grueling hours at her law firm. Furthermore, Miss Evans' recent, deeply concerning behavior, including installing hidden surveillance equipment in a family home without consent, and abandoning the marital home, has caused my client severe emotional distress." I didn't even blink. I just looked at Madeline. Madeline stood up, smoothing the front of her jacket. "Your Honor, Mr. Brooks is painting a lovely picture, but unfortunately, he's using imaginary paint." Judge Reyes sighed. "Proceed, Miss Frost." "First, regarding the hidden surveillance," Madeline began, her voice ringing clear and authoritative across the courtroom. "The camera was placed in a common area of a home jointly owned by my client and her brother, specifically to monitor a pet. It is entirely legal under Washington state law. Moreover, the footage captured on that camera cleared my client of false, malicious allegations of felony assault allegations that Mr. Evans publicly supported in a hospital waiting room." Oliver flushed red, staring down at the table. "Second, regarding the division of assets," Madeline continued, pulling a thick stack of papers from her briefcase. "We are filing a motion for an unequal distribution of assets in favor of my client, due to Mr. Evans' gross marital misconduct and dissipation of marital funds." Simon Brooks scoffed loudly. "Objection. Your Honor, there is no proof of misconduct." "Oh, Simon, sit down before you embarrass yourself further," Madeline said sharply, handing a copy of the documents to the bailiff to pass to the judge, and tossing another copy onto Brooks's table. "Your Honor, Exhibit A is a comprehensive forensic audit of Mr. Evans' personal checking account and his corporate expense account over the past 12 months. Oliver stopped bouncing his leg. He went entirely rigid. "You will see," Madeline purred, pacing slowly in front of the judge's bench, "that Mr. Evans has spent excess of $80,000 of joint marital funds on luxury hotel stays, expensive jewelry, and fine dining. These expenditures were not made for the benefit of his wife." Judge Reyes adjusted her glasses, flipping through the pages. "Who are they for, Miss Frost?" "Exhibit B, Your Honor," Madeline said, pulling out a flash drive. Sworn affidavits, digital correspondence, and security footage confirming that for the last 14 months, Oliver Evans has been engaged in a continuous, highly expensive extramarital affair with his 24-year-old paralegal, Sarah Jenkins. A collective gasp seemed to suck the air out of the courtroom. Oliver's face drained of all color, turning a sickening shade of gray. He looked at me, sheer terror in his eyes. In my past life, Oliver had used Sarah Jenkins to replace me the second the prison doors clanged shut. He had moved her into my house and given her my jewelry. Finding the paper trail of their affair in this life had been child's play for a woman who already knew exactly where to look. Simon Brooks furiously flipped through the dossier, his face turning an angry purple as he realized his client had lied to him. "But wait, Your Honor. There is more," Madeline said, twisting the knife. Exhibit C. 3 days after the incident at the hospital, while my client was residing in a hotel, Mr. Evans attempted to secretly transfer $200,000 from their joint investment account into a private, offshore trust in the Bahamas. This is a blatant violation of the automatic financial restraining order placed upon the filing of this divorce. Judge Reyes looked up, her expression turning thunderous. She glared down at Oliver. "Mr. Evans, did you attempt to hide marital assets during an active divorce proceeding?" Oliver opened his mouth, but only a pathetic squeak came out. He looked at his lawyer, who physically took a step away from him. "Your Honor," Madeline concluded, returning to her seat, "given the infidelity, the emotional abandonment, and the attempted financial fraud, we ask that my client retain 100% of her partnership shares, the entirety of the joint investment accounts to offset the dissipated funds, and that Mr. Evans assume the entirety of the credit card debt he accrued wooing his mistress." Judge Reyes didn't hesitate. Motion granted. "Mr. Brooks, I suggest you advise your client to sign the settlement agreement, Miss. Frost has drafted, or I will refer his attempted asset concealment to the district attorney for a fraud investigation. We are adjourned." The gavel slammed down, sounding exactly like a coffin slamming shut. I stood up, buttoning my suit jacket. Oliver was trembling, his hands flat on the table, as if trying to keep the earth from spinning. He had nothing. His reputation was ruined. His finances were gutted, and he was about to drown in debt. I walked past his table, leaning in just close enough for him to hear me. "I told you, Oliver," I whispered, my voice colder than ice. "You chose them. Now you get to live with the consequences." I walked out of the courtroom and into the bright Seattle afternoon, breathing in the sweet, clean air of absolute victory. The neon sign of the Starlight Inn flickered, a dying fly buzzing in a spiderweb of cracked glass. It was 2:00 a.m. in Reno, Nevada, and the desert air was biting cold. Inside room 114, the air was thick with the smell of cheap whiskey, sweat, and stale cigarette smoke. Bea sat on the edge of the lumpy, stained mattress, clutching a thin blanket around her shoulders. Her perfectly highlighted hair was greasy and matted to her skull. Her designer nails were chipped, dirt caked underneath them. She looked down at the floor, where her Louis Vuitton bag sat open, completely empty. "Where is it, Wyatt?" Bea croaked, her voice hoarse from days of screaming. "Where is the rest of the money?" Wyatt paced the length of the tiny room like a caged animal. He was sweating profusely, his eyes darting to the locked door every few seconds. "It's gone, Bea. I told you, I hit a bad streak at the pepper mill. I just needed one good hand to double up. But the dealer pulled a 21. You lost $20,000 playing blackjack?" Bea shrieked, launching herself off the bed. She pounded her fists against his chest. "You idiot. You absolute idiot. You told me we had millions. You told me if I faked the miscarriage, we'd get the house, we'd sell it, and we'd be rich." Wyatt violently shoved her backward. Bea stumbled, hitting her hip hard against the cheap wooden dresser. "Shut up," Wyatt hissed, grabbing her by the arms. "You think this is what I wanted? I had guys from Blackwood breathing down my neck. If I didn't get out of Seattle, They were going to put me in a wood chipper. B stared at him, the horrifying reality finally piercing through her delusion. Blackwood? You don't have any money at all. You're in debt. Yes, Wyatt yelled, dragging a hand down his face. And now, we're broke. We have $40 to our name, B. $40. B let out a hysterical, broken sob. She had thrown away a comfortable, luxurious life with a devoted, wealthy husband. She had destroyed her sister-in-law's life, alienated her entire social circle, and become a fugitive, all for a man who had used her as a temporary distraction while his world collapsed. I'm going back, B cried, scrambling toward her empty bag. I'm calling Liam. I'll tell him you manipulated me. I'll tell him you forced me to do it. He loves me. He'll take me back. Wyatt let out a dark, cruel laugh. Call him with what phone, B? I pawned yours yesterday to buy into the poker tournament. And even if you could, Liam is bankrupt. He's sleeping in his car because of the documents I made him sign. He has nothing. You have nothing. B froze. She slowly turned around, looking at the dirty, peeling wallpaper of the motel room. This wasn't a temporary setback. This was her permanent reality. Suddenly, the heavy roar of a large diesel engine echoed in the parking lot outside. Wyatt froze. The color instantly drained from his face. He crept toward the window, peeling back a millimeter of the moldy curtain to peek outside. A matte black Chevy Suburban had parked horizontally across the exit of the motel lot. 4 large men in dark jackets stepped out. They didn't look like police. They looked like men who carried very heavy, very blunt instruments for a living. Oh God, Wyatt whimpered, backing away from the window. Oh God, they found me. Who? Bea asked, panic rising in her chest. Blackwood. Wyatt grabbed a heavy brass lamp from the bedside table. B. You have to distract them. Go out there. Scream. Do something. I need to get out the bathroom window. B stared at him in sheer disbelief. You want me to go out there and face a gang of loan sharks so you can run away? Do it, you stupid bitch. Wyatt snarled, raising the lamp threateningly. If they get in here, they'll kill us both. Before B could respond, a thunderous crash echoed through the room. The cheap wooden door exploded inward, splintering off its hinges as a massive boot kicked it open. 3 men rushed into the room. Wyatt swung the lamp, but one of the men caught his arm, twisted it violently until a sickening snap echoed, and drove a fist into Wyatt's stomach. Wyatt collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, clutching his broken arm. B screamed, pressing herself into the corner of the room, crying hysterically. The largest man, wearing a leather jacket, stepped over Wyatt's writhing body. He looked down at him with dead, shark-like eyes. Wyatt Whitwell, the man said softly. Mr. Blackwood sends his regards. You missed your payment. Please, Wyatt choked out, spitting blood onto the carpet. I can get the money. I just need time. Time's up, the man said. He gestured to the other 2. Put him in the trunk. They dragged Wyatt out of the room by his collar, his heels scraping against the cheap linoleum. He screamed for help, begging B to do something. But she just stayed curled in the corner, shaking with terror. The man in the leather jacket turned to B. He looked her up and down with absolute disgust. Consider this your lucky day, sweetheart, he muttered. We only came for the debt. He turned and walked out, leaving the shattered door hanging on its hinges. A minute later, the tires of the Suburban screeched out of the parking lot, fading into the desert night. B was left completely alone in a destroyed motel room, thousands of miles from home, with $40 and no phone. The police would arrive 20 minutes later, called by the terrified motel manager. They would find B wandering the parking lot in a state of shock. When they ran her name, they would discover she was wanted in Washington state for filing a false police report and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, a little parting gift Madeline Frost and I had left with the Seattle PD. 6 months later, the skies over Seattle were a brilliant, cloudless blue. I stood on the expansive terrace of the Harrison and Hayes building, holding a crystal flute of champagne. The firm had just announced my promotion to managing partner. Richard had decided to step back into a consultative role, and he had handed the reins to me. Life had settled into a beautiful, rhythmic symphony of success. Oliver's tech firm had fired him after the details of his divorce became public gossip in the corporate circles. He was currently working mid-level sales at a regional paper supplier, drowning in the debt from his settlement and paying off his mistress's credit cards. Liam had eventually filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The last I heard, he was working the night shift at a logistics warehouse in Kent. Ironic, considering he used to own one. He had tried to contact me once, a pathetic, weeping voicemail begging for forgiveness. I didn't even listen to the whole thing before deleting it and blocking the number. Wyatt Whitwell was serving 8 to 12 years in a Nevada state penitentiary for federal wire fraud, having been handed over to the authorities by Blackwood Capital after they broke both his legs to make their point. And Adelaide? She had accepted a plea deal to avoid jail time. She was currently serving 500 hours of community service, picking up trash along the I-5 highway in an orange reflective vest. A permanent felony record attached to her name. I took a sip of my champagne, looking out over the city that had once been my prison. In my past life, I had died in the dark, crying out for a family that didn't care. In this life, I had burned the family tree to the roots, and from the ashes, I had built an empire. Fate had given me a second chance, and I had used it to ensure that the people who threw me to the wolves became the ones howling in the dark. And that is how you rewrite your destiny. Rosie didn't just survive the vicious trap set by the people she trusted most. She dismantled their lives piece by piece and built a flawless empire on the ruins. Liam, Oliver, Bea, and Wyatt thought they could use her as a disposable scapegoat. But they learned the hard way that karma has a terrifying memory. Did Rosie's revenge go too far, or did her toxic family get exactly what they deserved? Let me know whose side you are on in the comments below. If you were hooked by this story of ultimate betrayal and savage payback, please hit that like button and share this video with your fellow drama lovers. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss our wild, real-life revenge stories. Until next time, stay sharp and trust your instincts.